Hello and welcome back. So far to date, we've shown you how to create a pivot table. We've shown you how to create a data grid within a pivot table, do conditional formatting, and build some graphs. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to show you how to create some what I'll call scatterplot graphs, because they use scatterplot elements, to complete the final three graphs which are shown. So if you go back to the sheet, you'll see we have the average sensor, proximity, and steps. So there's three elements. The key thing here that I don't want to lose focus on is while we focus on the mechanical elements, actually analyzing what all this means, right? When people leave their work, it's because they have low identity, they perceive themselves as having a low employee role, and they perceive themselves as having a low employee position. Clearly, men feel that way. And if you notice, with the advent of sensors, we actually can look at the sensor data, because a lot of corporations are asking or requiring their employees to have sensors. But we don't really understand what this data means. Why do we put sensors on people if we don't understand what they can produce? So here we have some examples of how employees with sensors, which is a whole other ethical issue entirely, are demonstrated in here, and we can start to analyze this data. This is relatively new. We've never had employee sensors before, so we have to actually start to look at this data. So that's why we can go back to Excel, and here you can see we created a sample sensor, right? In this case, it was the average of sensor heartbeat. To date, you actually have enough information to create this graph. I actually used the same pivot table as before. We actually produced for identity, role, and position, but I added three metrics, which is heartbeat, proximity. Proximity means the proximity to a computer, and step counts, how many times people are walking around a day in that regard. So it's pretty interesting. Those that don't leave tend to walk more than those that do leave. So you're just looking at the data table, you can see that, but maybe you want to show it graphically. So one of the key things is, how do we do this? Well, let's start with something we already know. Let's start with the actual table that we did before. This was one of the exercises we completed before. It's a double graph. Why don't we right-click, move or copy, create a copy, and we'll put it right after part 3, and we'll rename it part 3 too, because we kind of already did this once. I already did want to show you where we started with before we create it. Okay, the way this works is you click on the pivot table, you go to pivot table, field list, and here we just need to add the fields. These fields are located towards the bottom. They are step head count. I'm sorry, I misstate that one. Heartbeat and proximity in that regard. And you got to make sure that they're averages. So it's sensitive. Average. And now we create three averages. You see the table values went in here. Now you can either leave the previous three, or you can just take them out. So we can put them in, take them out. We made a copy of this one. We could have also just kept it on the very same sheet that we had before. You'll notice the reference formulas got deleted. So you got to think about these things. When you delete things and take them out, you'll wipe out the previous values. So it's not that straightforward. But we're still doing the same thing with the men leaving, the values in the rows, and we're averaging all three of these components. That is now your pivot table, which is your data array that you will need to complete this exercise. Now these charts aren't split graph charts. These charts, I mean, it could be, but they don't really have to be. In this case, what do we have? We have heartbeat, step count, proximity. So that updated just fine. The other values did not. So simply, you could just simply go like this and copy it. Copy and pasting works just fine. Voila, we have the data values. Probably could just do this. And now we didn't do that right. We meant to do it from the top because relative positioning, that's why it did that. So I'm glad I made that mistake, otherwise you might not have known that. So Excel copies everything in relative positioning, that's why it does that. And now we have our data values. And you can see it actually created those charts based on those data values, but those aren't really the charts we wanted, so let's just delete those. A lot of times in Excel charting, rather than actually edit the chart, it's much better to just to not do that and to recreate the chart. So the other thing is, we're going to create 3 charts, right? One for heartbeat. You can put everything on one chart, but that's a different chart, right? One for heartbeat, one for, let's get specific, step count. Make sure we get the step counts in there. Make sure you get the data value. I messed that up. It's not too difficult to recover. And then the last one, between the space, would be proximity. And then again, we have the 0 and 1. We're skipping NA. 0 and 1. And make sure we get the average of sensor proximity. Sensor proximity means how close you are to your laptop. They can actually look at that through RFID technology. So now we've created those. You know, it would just be nicer to pull this right off the pivot table, but if you do that and you look at pivot table options, let's get rid of that word values in there. Field caption filters. And then we get rid of it. It does. But the problem is when I go to create this, I'm not sure it will actually create a chart. Excel is kind of finicky in that one. And we're creating a bubble chart. See, it gives you an error. It can be edited, place a different type of chart count. It doesn't like those type of information sitting on top of it. You also notice that it messed up the graph. So this is why you want to create your pivot table separate from your actual data views, because pivot tables are pretty sensitive and you should use them as a retrieval vehicle and data analysis vehicle. Well, maybe not the final presentation vehicle as you just saw. Pivot tables can be useful and you can format them to a degree, but you almost want to collect the data in Excel and then present the data in Excel using that as a mini, what we'll call Excel data mart, as opposed to the actual source of the actual data. Just link into it and you'll be just fine. So back to the chart, average heartbeats. You'll notice, interestingly, people who leave have a higher heartbeat. Maybe they're more stressed. I'm not a doctor, but who knows. So now we have our chart, the average heartbeat. But it's kind of strange, right? Because it's on values of 0. It doesn't bring it over. Now this is a scatter chart, by the way. So what we have to kind of do is look at the axis, and we need to format it a little bit where we can actually make the minimum not look so weird there. I don't like that. Make the axis cross at 0.01. Yeah, that way we can get both values on here in that regard. You can play with this to how you want it to display the values of 1s and 2s in that regard. They're not really data points, these are actually bubble graphs, so they're just taking the object and you're just showing the object inside of the thing. You can play with the both axes, the scale and everything else. So if you look at it, now I have both bubbles in here, and these are 1s and these are these are 0s and these are 1s. And you can think about it, that's how you actually create these charts. So if you go back to the chart, you'll end up with these values here, and you got to represent them properly, and you can get the information. So that's how you get the data values, and you get the averages, and you display them in Excel. And basically you're just replicating all 3 charts. Of course you have circles, you have to look and see if Excel offers the ability to change the circle to bubbles to other objects. But in general, this is exactly how you create all 3 charts. I hope that this video was helpful.